Welcome to class today, everyone. Today we're talking about basically the origins of ancient Egypt. So while you had the business of civilizations coming and going in Mesopotamia, similar history was occurring in the Nile River Valley. It's estimated the earliest nomads of Africa began to settle on the Nile River around 5000 BC. They called this land Kemet, meaning black land, because the soil was so rich and dark. The Nile was basically the source of all things good in Kemet, which would later become, Egypt. Egypt was a pretty harsh, hot, sandy place, but around the river life was abundant. There was little rain, so the water of the Nile was used for drinking, bathing, and growing crops. You can see in the picture below, the Nile splits off into many branches before reaching the sea. This is called the Nile Delta. The flooding of the Nile was seasonal and therefore predictable. Every spring, heavy rains in Central Africa will lead to summer flooding of the Nile. This predictable flooding left rich soil for farming and was far less destructive than the floods of Mesopotamia. Remember, the floods of Mesopotamia were unpredictable, so it would come without warning. If you knew when the flooding was going to be, you could take steps to protect yourself. You can see here in this picture from Google Earth that even today, the Nile River is the source of much of the life, and the delta there is very lush. So the geography of Egypt's landscape is useful, or proved useful, for keeping it isolated, unlike Mesopotamia, which was basically faced constant invasion. To the east and west were deserts. In the north you had the delta and the marshes, keeping invaders out from coming in from the Mediterranean. And to the south, dangerous rapids called cataracts prevented ships from sailing up the river to invade Egypt. Now farmers planted wheat, barley, and flaxseed. During the dry season, they would work on irrigation ditches and basins for water storage. They would collect papyrus and use it to make ropes and baskets. Later, papyrus would be used to make paper. Here's an Egyptian tool called a shadoof, and it was used to grab water from the river. On the topic of paper, let's talk about writing. Most of us have heard about Egyptian hieroglyphics, but there are some fine details to learn. Originally, the written language was all pictographs, so if there was a picture of a house, that meant house, and a picture of a man or cat meant man or cat. Mostly, just scribes were able to read and write, but as the language progressed, they started making symbols for sounds, much like our alphabet. Now, as I just said, not many people in Egypt could use the written language. Pretty much just the scribes, which were men, whose job specifically was to read and write. So they had that in common with the scribes of Mesopotamia. So as the early Egyptians thrived, they had surpluses of food. This led to trade as well as specialization. A need for organization increased the need for a government entity to handle logistics of irrigation, building of public works, and regulation of trade. Villages grew into kingdoms, each with its own king. Over time, these kingdoms were gobbled up by each other, and by 4000 BC there were only two kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Now, Narmer was a fellow, and he was the king of Lower Egypt. In 3100 BC, he took his forces and moved north, conquering Upper Egypt. He then married an Upper Egyptian princess, uniting Egypt for the first time. King Narmer built his capital city of Memphis in the middle of his kingdom, basically on the border between what was Upper and Lower Egypt. And his kingdom lasted long after he died. His son took over, and his son's son, and so on. This one family of rulers is called a dynasty. From 3000 to 322 BC, 30 different dynasties ruled Egypt. And we'll learn more about these rulers and their impacts in the next lesson. For now, just go ahead and move on to the quiz. It's a standard basic multiple choice quiz. If you've read the lesson, and as I mentioned on the intro page, read the book, read the lesson in the book, you should do just fine. You won't need the 2 attempts. That's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.